Um, I hope all of you had great lunch. Good to see you all. So my session is about statistical content-based filters for spam detection. Okay, so according to IBM, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is being generated every day. And 90% of the data what we have in the world today has been generated in the last 2 years alone. So you can imagine the amount of data that we need to process. Take spam detector for example. A close look at your email inbox will reveal that 70% of it is like spam. And the remaining 30% doesn't mean that it is not spam because spammers are evolving their ways. So the past approaches like IP addresses, domain names, message headers, so all these have become obsolete and we need to come up with better techniques to detect spam. So we have designed an approach, that is we tweaked the existing approach and created something which is going to improve the spam detection rate by 29%. Yes, so it's 29%. That's the improvement which we have done. If you go to the next slide. Oh, this thing, I'm sorry. Okay. So for our example of spam detector, we are going to use two things. One is supervised and unsupervised learning. So data science and machine learning has three broad categories and these two are two of them. With the help of unsupervised learning, we'll create an offline database. Offline database is nothing but a collection of spam emails, and through supervised learning, an online database is created. That is nothing but an incoming email is compared with the offline database. In a general scenario, for offline database, k-means clustering algorithm is used. Through that algorithm, we'll divide the data into tuples and then create clusters. In a general scenario, an incoming email is compared with a cluster mean, but that doesn't mean that that is the actual thing which we need to compare with. So we have come up with a solution wherein we will not compare it with the cluster mean, but we will first generate a pure cluster, which is actually even much better than their existing cluster, and then we'll compare. So that's our approach. And again, as I said, it's going to be improved by 29%. That's the spam detection rate. If you want to learn more about it, I have my colleague here who is going to tell you about the solution and the implementation as well. Thank you.
I'm Chetna. Am I audible? I'm audible? Yes. Yeah. I'm Chetna. Thanks, Kavya, for the introduction of what do you mean by spam detection and how we can do it. I know this is one of the basic approach that a machine learning scientist or a technology will be trying to solve it. So when I say about machine data, one sec. Yeah. Everybody know, like, as I feel like most of the people know what is k-means clustering is. K-means clustering is one of the technique where we form a cluster using a big data. Our tool which we have developed will handle 10,000 emails at one instant. Might be, it's a huge data. And ours is an unsupervised version. Unsupervised version means we have an offline database ready. We means a trained set, which we see that from a spam content, we know that this percentage or this data set of 4,000 or 5,000 emails is already detected as spam. So when we will form a cluster out of it. How we'll form a cluster out of it? Using a node. A node is nothing but each of your training set might be of 10,000, you are dividing accordingly of 4,000 emails in one of a sub-module. Then you form it a tuple. And tuple, in a sense, you take a count of each of the tuples, what it is, and then you form a token count. We'll calculate the mean of each of the node. Mean of each of a node is calculated using this formula where the token count frequency of unique keys as towards a per email is calculated. In the pictorial representation, we can see what is a node means, and the star represents the mean of each of the node. Then we have a cluster here, we have a node here, we have to form a cluster. How to form a cluster is, we will have a distance cosine formula. The distance cosine formula is nothing but, we will use this number of tokens frequency and towards the number of means frequency, we will calculate how this group of things are different from the other group of emails. Using this formula, we can know there will be a pattern, like we will get the distance of each of the tuples and the mean, so we can have a cluster kind of a stuff here. So the pictorial representation gives us a cluster. then comes the biggest challenge. The challenge is how to assign the cluster mean to the closest cluster. So we have a closest cluster, we have a closest cluster. The only thing which we are trying to solve is when an incoming email comes in, how frequently or how rapidly we can identify whether it is a spam or a ham. The thing is, we had done experiments using multiple experiments using cosine distance formula, and one such experiment that we conducted was using discrete Fourier transformation. We know discrete Fourier transformation is just a pattern which flows up and down, and we know when it reaches at the peak, then we know that most of the tuples belong to this category. Might be a word of the, when we reverse it, it can be easier, or might be a word of way. As we have a tuples, we'll have a pattern. So the highest formulas were grouped together, we formed a cluster. That we take it as a highest peak or like cluster, pure cluster kind of a stuff. And we removed the outliers which were of not that of higher pattern. So the outliers were removed. But when the incoming email came in, when an incoming online email came in, when it formed when we form a tuples and when we try to reciprocate it with the cluster mean, the ratio was 3 out of 12, which didn't serve us purpose. And the iterations, number of iterations were more, most probably 12 or 13 iterations for a cluster. The time it took was higher. So the scalability was down, though it served our invention or purpose, but didn't solve the problem. So we came up with a later approach called as similarity score calculation. See, when I'm speaking about all these things, we are on a day, as Kavya said, there will be tons of emails which comes in. And it's not about only spam detection rate. We even have to say whether it is an ham or spam. So the tweak that we did to this approach was to form a pure cluster. How to form a pure cluster is again similarity score calculation. The similarity score was like when we did a similarity score, we came to a conclusion saying that when an incoming email comes in, we should not do that approach we should not calculate that tuples with the representative email instead of the mean of the cluster. So instead of mean of cluster, we started checking for the representative email. So representative email gave us a good approach, and there was a high increase in the scalability. Because of this scalability, we had a pure cluster. Because of this pure cluster, our similarity score ratio was high. The last time when I was telling it was 3 out of 12, it billowed down to 10 out of 12 iterations. And the number of pure clusters it was formed was just 10 iterations. Like in 5 or 6 iterations, we had multiple clusters which were more pure. So this was one of the easy signature which I was speaking about similarity score calculation. The number of overlapping unique tokens to the incoming email to the representative email. So we have an easy signature where the SDR rate was high and the FPR rate was low. When I say FPR rate was low, it means that the ham was detected at the earlier rate. And this is the architecture of it. We have a spam emails or a file store as an input, and which I was speaking about the data store of 10,000 emails or even more. And then we have an offline module where it calculates the cluster using forming the tuples, database was ready, and a catchy file was ready, and the cron job was running inside it to form it again and again to check whether it is a pure cluster or not. And when an incoming, we do a poll and pull the updated catchy files. The later part was an online module where this is the tricky thing where it just have a two call. One is HTTP post and HTTP response. With this just one response, we should just detect whether it is a spam or a ham. So the results are here. In the current approach means the one which I was telling on the similarity score calculation, and the proposed approach was something called as K-means approach. So we can see a tremendous increase, at least by 15 to 20% increase in the result sets. And we had experimental data sets with the assassination disjoints where my training set was 3793 and the spam detection was 75% and my testing set was just 1896 number of emails in the spam. And the SGR rate was 55.70%. See, the scalability was very high when compared to the previous IP or any of the other techniques. and the FPR rate is just 1.22%. In my second experiment set, where there are more of multiple spam emails, and we are just checking how this algorithm or tool works in. So when my training set is 3793 set of emails, the spam detection is 75%, and my SGR rate is 55.34%. But there is no FPR. Obviously, it's on the trained set. So such similar experiments, we did it using multiple folders. To improve the efficiency of this tool, as this is an offline module and we have to increase the efficiency as and when, because the spammers are very, they upgrade on its own, and most probably once in a day or twice in a day, depends on your company's whatever it is, you should capture the dynamically changing spam. So when we capture the dynamically changing spam, the position and neighboring information of the tuple changes. When the positioning and neighboring information of the tuple changes, then your cluster formation will change automatically. Then once the cluster is ready, we have to check for the purity again. When we see for the purity, we will have a spam detection rate higher. So the other one is to develop the techniques to speed up the algorithm. Most probably go back to your algorithm and try it out whether I can redo it for the links or do it for the other stuffs. So that techniques we can think of. This technique which I'm speaking about is very good for word corrections or spelling mistakes. That's how the spam people will be thinking of. That's all I have. Thank you. Any questions? Any questions? How do you
represent an email as a tuple?
We'll break down the whole emails into tuples, 3 words. So it's like you say my name is Chetna, the first 3 CHE is a tuple. THA is again a tuple. We'll break down the whole, as I said, it's a content based. We'll break down the whole content of a mail into tuples.
So there was something n-gram there, right? In one of the slides.
It's done. Sorry?
So there was a slide in which it was mentioned n-grams. So are those n words, or are you breaking the words into?
Yeah, we are
alphabets?
breaking the words into a 3-letter. Like tuple means a 3-letter word. Any big word has to be broken into 3-letter word. That's what we call tuple. That's what we convert that into a pattern and all that stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Hi everybody, so I'm Madhumita. Divya is going to be sharing this talk with me. We are from NetApp. I hope you have visited NetApp booth by now. And you should know by then if you have that NetApp sells storage systems. So storage systems, I'm sure you can imagine a data center where servers are typically stacked, and then storage acts as a backend for the storage, for the servers, where applications are deployed. So what becomes a challenge is how do we provision this storage? How do we distribute the workloads, which are typically applications like web server or mail or database applications, anything. So this is what we are planning to, we were planning to solve with this work. I'll quickly go through the, goals. So we said, I'm going to use some storage specific terminologies here. So IOPS means input output per second, which is a measure of performance of the storage system. And then latency is just the response time of the storage system. So we said we would try to reasonably accurately predict the maximum number of IOPS you can get for a system workload combination and the latency. If you could accurately do that, it would really help storage administrators to do things like increasing existing applications intensity. So if a mail server is being deployed for 1,000 users, can he use it for 2000 users, or provisioning new workloads. Workloads meaning applications again, or migrating existing workloads around the data center, because these systems are typically sold in like 2 or 4 node clusters, and then you would have multiple of these clusters, and you would want to move applications within these clusters to be able to manage, to be able to get better utilization of your systems, as well as get better performance for your applications. So, just to get a feel of the problem, right? So there are a lot of factors which affect the performance in terms of IOPS and latency. So there are system factors like there are number of cores, memory, or network. These factors are static factors, but then there is also a dynamic dimension to the system, because the system is already being used. It consumes certain number of CPU utilization or network bandwidth, and this dynamic aspect also would affect what performance you would get from the system. So it is not only limited to system factors. There are workload factors which affect the performance, because workloads vary reasonably within themselves. Some workloads or applications tend to do more reads than writes. Some workloads are more sequential, some others are random in terms of the offsets that they access. And then some applications tend to read-write in small sizes, but some applications tend to read-write in bigger sizes. So file systems typically respond differently to all these workload characteristics. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. So it is a difficult problem. There are a lot of dynamic moving factors. And to be able to predict performance reasonably well is a challenge. The way we looked at it was to model storage system as a black box and then predict its performance. So what we essentially do is we collect certain metrics from the system periodically, very simple metrics like latency IOPS every minute or every 30 seconds, and based on it we predict what is the maximum IOPS that you would get for this system for this workload. So let me just go through the fundamental technique. You can refer the, apparently references come first. Sorry, there's some glitch in the slide. So, this is a standard result. So outstanding IOs, which is the IOs pending with the storage system, is typically, the latency you would expect from a storage system is typically directly proportional to number of IOs that are pending with the system. Very intuitive result. And then we have something called Little's law. So, which is again a very elegant standard result from queuing theory. I hope you have definitely heard of it. So, what it says is outstanding IO is multiplication of latency and IOPS. Now, if you combine these two, you get a relationship between latency and IOPS. It looks like a hockey stick. So again, this is a very intuitive result. What it says is, if you are operating in lower IOPS region, so you are not pushing many IOs to the system, your latency would be in acceptable limits. But then if you push more and more IOPS, your latency would start increasing. And you would reach a point where you won't be able to push any more IOPS to the system. So your system would have saturated. So we said we would determine that point in advance so that it would help storage admins make their decisions in deploying their applications. Now, so here is what we did again. We collected latency IOPS observations from storage systems periodically when the workload was already deployed. And then we got different points on this latency OIO curve. Sorry, the pointer is not working for me. So we got different points in this curve. And then we did, so here is where we used machine learning. So we have different points, but we don't know how the line would look like. And then we actually did regression on those points to be able to determine the line. And I'm not going to get into mathematical derivation of this result, but the result is that maximum IOPS is 1 by A, where A being the slope of the line between latency and OIO. So you can refer our paper which we recently published in a conference. So once we do regression, which is a very basic machine learning technique, we would get A and we would be able to predict the maximum IOPS. So I'll just quickly go through some results. So these are real workloads, TPC and web. Left side is TPC, right side is web. So you can see the relationship between latency and outstanding IO. These are actual points, so they almost follow a linear behavior. And once you determine the slope of that line using regression, so we also used outlier detection, which is again a standard machine learning thing which is available pretty much in every software that you could use for machine learning. So once we have these slopes, as determined by the formula, the inverse of the slope is the maximum possible IOPS. And that is what we saw, that our prediction was fairly accurate. If you see the lower half of the slide, the green colors are the actual points. So observed max is the black line. And cyan colored is our prediction as we see more and more points. So our prediction gets fairly accurate when we see more and more points because we have more to learn from. And that happens with both the workloads. So we could do this reasonably accurately for both the workloads. And there are many, you can look up the paper for more results. Yeah, this was a nice combination of some parts from queuing theory, some parts from machine learning, and we actually used it for a systems problem. So with that, I'll hand it over to Divya. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending. So my friend Madhumita just spoke about technique 1, where they got the latency IOP curve. What I am going to tell about is the next technique where we get to predict the latency in a mixed workload environment. Now, we already saw the definition of a workload. A workload is nothing but an application which translates into a read and a write IOP for a storage system. And when we say mixed workload, it could be the random read, the sequential read, random write, sequential write, all coming in together with different IO sizes. Now we see there are so many varying factors here. So this graph just depicts as to what all affects the latency, right from the disk type, because you know the SAS, SATA, SSD would have different impact on the latency, the file system, the fragmentation, capacity, they all. But what we are going to concentrate on two varying factors, as the throughput and the IOP characterization, that's the IO profiling. And we would see the results, how they affect the latency. So this is what our fundamental technique is. We use a lot of lab runs, we collect a lot of empirical data. So what we would do is keep the constant factors, the capacity, disk and throughput, the capacity, disk and fragmentation as to one constant value, and we'll be varying the different IO profile. So, and then we do a lot of learning. That will basically tell us that, for example, how a random read latency behaves when you have high sequential read and writes coming in. And all this learning is basically bucketized based on the profile we collected on. And that goes in the backend database we have. We also do this with a lot of existing deployment we already have, and that also goes into the learning. And as and when we learn, we keep on adding new curves, and we also improvise on the previous curves. This basically goes into the next part, which is the prediction part. Now this prediction helps us to further deploy new systems and or probably add a new workload to an existing systems. So this is how the results look like. So if you look at the first graph, what we have kept constant over there is a SAS disk, and the capacity and the fragmentation is being kept constant. But what varies over there, the lines, the curves you see, is just like what Madhumita described about the hockey stick. And they keep on varying with every variation in the IO profile. So if you see the red line on the first graph, what it tells you is that it's when you have a 10% random read and a 90% sequential read coming to a system, that's how it looks like. But as and when you go on increasing and you make 90% random read and 10% sequential read, your latency, the latency given by the random read would differ. And we have plotted all these graphs, we collect all this empirical data and we bucketize based on the IO profile. Similarly, the graph 2, what we did was, we changed the constants and we used different disk types and different capacities. So, and then what the results we see, what graphs we see is completely different. So this is so much of data we would need to collect just to get the accurate results when we have to do the dynamic prediction. So this is what the second technique was all about. I'll probably just stop for question and answers. So it all depends on the system. The question was what's easier to do, a random read or a sequential read. So it all depends on the architecture of your storage system. But a sequential read would always be better because generally in a file system you will have the read ahead algorithms and prefetching already present. So a sequential read or of a bigger IO size will be much better than doing a random read.
I see. So I should be expecting that when there are more sequential reads,
Yeah.
My IOPS threshold should come later.
Yeah. So this curve is specifically for the random read.
Okay.
So as it says that this is predicting the random read latency when you have random read and sequential read coming on the system. So we are segregating the problem of the random reads and the sequential reads. But we are for the testing purpose, we get all the IOPS in that, and we would specifically measure the results for the random read.
Okay.
Yeah. So did I answer that question?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Do you have any follow-up there?
I'll follow up with you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'll just pass on to the next one.
Very good afternoon, everybody. So today I'm here to talk to you about one machine learning use case that we are driving at Cisco, basically to help the talent management HR team to come up with relevant and personalized training recommendations for employees. So this is extremely important since this will help the HR team to focus on the trainings or publish the trainings that are relevant to people where most of the employees want to get trained at. And also this helps in an increased training adoption among the employees since they are basically presented with the trainings and also being planned with the trainings that they want to enroll for. So as with any recommendation engine, I would like to explain you some basic concepts just in case people are not very familiar with the concepts of recommendation engine. So first of all, you can have a collaborative filtering based recommendation engine. So collaborative filtering basically looks at what you have opted for, what your preferences were in the past, and then looks at that and also looks at people who have had a similar kind of preferences in the past. And then it tries to sort of group all these similar people together, and if say person 1 in that group has opted for a training or a product, even you can use it the same concept for product recommendations. So if person 1 in that group is interested in something, which means a similar user might also be interested in the same thing. So that's one concept wherein you use a user group based approach. Next thing is, if I know individual preferences of a person, say for example, somewhere if I have updated that I'm interested in technologies like Java, or I have specifically updated that sort of an information, I can always tie it directly back to the content and see that the training is in Java and this person is also interested in Java, so and he or she has not taken it in the past. So in the future this person might be interested in it. So these are the two ways to look at recommendations and how to recommend a particular content or product or training to a person. So here, since at Cisco, when we look at the data that is available to us, we have an opportunity to combine both of these approaches and get the best out of both. So that's what we have done. So what we do is, every company has an HR database where you have the employee profile data, to where they possibly have the team structure, the leader to which they report to, the team they work with, right? And possibly they would also have updated their skill sets and expertise there. So that's a very rich source of content which we bank on. So that's with the employee profile data. And then you also have the training history. What are the different trainings that employees have taken in the past? So once you have these two data, what you can do is you can look at the training history and figure out the employees who can form a group or cluster. And based on that cluster, you can recommend new trainings to the employees who fall under the same cluster. So how do we do this whole clustering and everything is using something called cosine similarity and Jaccard's coefficient. So cosine similarity can be used to compute how similar two strings are. So say for example, one person's information we are encoding as a string. So everything, their reporting structure, what is the group name, what's the team name, and what are the expertise and skill sets that they have updated. So all of that becomes a string that represents one person. And every person in the organization can have the same kind of information associated to them. So considering these two strings as two vectors, you can actually find the distance between them. You can find the cosine distance between them. So in one of the previous presentations, we had the formula for finding the cosine distance. So it's the same thing. So once you have the cosine distance, it serves as a correlation index or a correlation score. So two people who have very high correlation score, they fall into the same bucket. And same thing, so users or employees can be bucketed into a group based on this correlation score. Similarly, trainings can also be grouped into clusters based on the correlation score, because there are a lot of parameters associated with a training, like which topic it is based on. Is it a technical or a professional training, and a lot of other things. So using this, basically what we are doing is trying to group together people and trying to group together items, and then recommend items to people. So we'll have a detailed architecture diagram in the next slide. So before we go there, I just want to mention that we are using Hadoop platform for this recommendation system, and basic engine is built on Spark. Okay. Yeah. So this diagram basically talks about pretty much everything that forms part of this recommendation engine. So first and foremost, you should be looking at the data sources that you have. And the data sources that you have will help you understand which approach you should use for your recommendation engine. So since we have all possible data sources, when we talk about a company, right, you are pretty much open to the data of all the history data of the employee, which training he or she has taken in the past. So that information you have. Also you have the profile information of employees, where he or she is focusing on, which technology group they work on, which technology stack and all that. So this is a reason why we could combine collaborative filtering and content-based and come up with a hybrid recommendation engine, combining both. So say for example, when a new web portal is starting, basically you don't have any history data. So, but then you have the registration information of the customer when the customer registers. So these are the times when content-based recommendation approaches are used. You don't have history, you have no way to tie users together and say that they might be the same category. But at the same time, if you have some kind of a profile information or say for example age group or something like that, you can tie it back to some of the items that the person might be interested in. That's content based. So yes, so coming back to this, so once we extract all this data into Hadoop platform, into our HDFS, we run Spark, we run the cosine similarity algorithm, which is basically implemented in Spark on this data set. And once we have this correlation score between employees, so which all employees are very closely related with each other, this kind of a correlation index we have. And then collaborative filtering and content-based approach is basically applied on top of this information. Recommendations are published to the learning and development UI, where users provide feedback for the recommendation, like or dislike, which is a very powerful driver for the understanding how effective the recommendations were, and if we need to tune the engine to to better suit the employees. And then the user interaction is analyzed, and this serves as a feedback loop. So briefly, this is all about the recommendation engine that we developed at Cisco for recommending personalized training recommendations to employees. So instead of all the emails that the HR system used to send without knowing who will be interested in what training, now this approach has helped them plan their training calendar appropriately based on the interest in the employee community, and thus increase training adoption. So, thanks a lot.
Good afternoon all. I'm Smita from Fidelity Investment and part of HR Analytics team. I'm here today to present managing human capital through predictive analytics. Well, India's current attrition rate is 12% and 14%, and it's more than global attrition rate of 11 to 12%. And major IT companies in India are facing attrition rate of 18 to 20%. And it is huge rate, right? And employee attrition is major concern and issue for major industries or many industries. And do we have solution for this? And why the attrition rate is high? Maybe job market and more millennials are entering workforce. So what is the solution that we are expecting? Organizations should move from traditional approach to modern approach like predictive analytics. Terabytes of data generated every day, and it's used for predictive analytics. And industry is moving from descriptive statistics like trend analysis and reporting to predictive analytics. Now the question comes, what is predictive analytics? Using historical data through statistical analysis, predicting what is the likelihood of an event or what is going to happen in future. Before joining HR analytics team, I have experience of working with different domains and industries where I have seen how predictive analytics used to solve their business cases or business problem. For example, insurance industry to predict who are going to lapse or who are not going to pay their premium. Same with banking industry, who are not going to pay their EMI. And telecom industry to know who are going to switch their services. And it's not always predicting who are defaulters. We can see retail industry use predictive analytics to know who will become my customer and who are going to buy my product. So they can control their customer jumping or switching to their competitors. So Interestingly, like predictive analytics, the statistics shows that only 4% of companies are utilizing predictive analytics in HR domain or workforce. The question comes, can you use predictive analytics in HR domain? Absolutely yes. Few of the companies, they have attained success within short span of time through predictive analytics, and they have controlled their attrition too. So, can we do that? Yes. And what we can solve in HR domain through predictive analytics? I'll highlight 3 major business cases. One is quality of hire. If you can predict who are your high potential employees or high performer employees, and if you profile them and you can create a scorecard and you use this scorecard while hiring process. And the next is, can you predict leadership profile? Who will become my leaders within my organization? And the third and the major one is retaining your employees, retaining your high performers, high potential employees. So now today I'll highlight how can you retain your employee through predictive analytics. Before starting with retention risk model, I would like to share one of the important quote by Narayan Murthy, co-founder of Infosys. Our precious asset move out of the door each evening, and we have to make sure that they come back next morning. Yes, retention is always better than hiring or recruiting new employee. Why? Hiring is always costly and it's time consuming too, and it affects your business. So what exactly we do in retention risk model? First of all, we will identify or predict why employees are leaving the organization or why they decided to leave. Maybe they're not happy with the organization or not happy with their managers or they're not liking the work culture. Second is scoring each employee on their risk of leaving the organization. When I say score, it's a probability which ranging from 0 to 1 and will predict who are at high risk. And third is you are profiling the high risk employees. So in order to understand them better. Based on all these, finally, organization can take customized strategies to retain the employees. I have seen, and there are many organizations, they do retention risk model by using basic variables that are available with them or with their data source. When I say basic variables, maybe employee level, business unit, business group. But using different and very detailed, accurate approach will help you to come up with very accurate model. When I say accurate or accuracy of the model, think that I have identified probability score for each individual when using 2014 data, and when you go back and check in 2015 whether they have left, then you can tell that my model is very accurate based on my probability score. That's what we call accurate. Now I wanted to highlight about this approach bit because we got 90% of accuracy through this, and also we got accurate results on this. So what is this approach, how it's different is, when we created a focus group and did a brainstorming on why employees leave and why the employee would have left their previous organization. And once we have this, we try to create a theme around employee attrition. When I say theme, maybe manager is one theme, retention and reward is a second theme, maybe growth is the third theme. And under each theme, we created more than 200 plus hypotheses. When I say hypothesis, maybe gender disparity between manager and employee, or generation disparity between the manager and employee, or difference between the team length of service or tenure and the employee length of service or tenure. Maybe these are leading employee attrition. And based on this hypothesis, we created more than 800 plus additional variable. When I say additional variable, when I say this is my hypothesis, I'll try to create a variable based on this hypothesis. So once this is finalized, we applied a statistical model called logistic regression to come up with the output. And why this is important is, when I created an additional variable, I could come up with the exact attributes for employee attrition. If I wouldn't have used this, think that you got a manager as a attributes for attrition, then you can't generalize that all the managers are leading attrition. That's why it's always important to go with detailed approach of retention risk model. And this is the typical modeling process, but it starts with business understanding till deployment. But only one thing I would like to highlight here is 90% of our time is involved with data culling, data cleaning, and data preparation. Because if you insert garbage in, you will get garbage out. It's always suggested to use quality of data to come up with very good model. And this is the snapshot to show how the additional variable, hypothesis, and themes are created. And these are the basic variables we had in our data source, that is employee type and business unit, business group, etc. And this is how we created our additional variable, hypothesis, and theme. And I have already explained this approach while explaining the approach. You can see I would like to highlight these are the manager, team, comp, and benefit are the major themes that we created, and under each theme we came up with the additional variable. Maybe like what is manager performance, how he is performing. Maybe manager performance is leading to employee attrition, and even team, length of service of the team, and also like what is the team size of manager. Maybe if the manager is handling very big team, maybe he is not able to concentrate on each individual, so maybe it's leading to attrition. So this is to show how we created the, and all the hypotheses and whatever I explained that are proved through statistical model. And here the technique used is logistic regression. Logistic regression is a statistical technique which uses independent variable to predict the dependent variable. When I say dependent variable, here the dependent variable is attrition or not attrition. And independent variables are age, gender, and all those above 800 variables, whatever that I mentioned, we used all those as an independent variable. And based on all these, based on all the statistics, finally we got around 10 attributes as a significant variables which are leading to employee attrition. And this is the sample output. What exactly we get finally through our model. And this is more simple. Maybe our actual result will be a bit complicated than this. And maybe like I would like to explain what is this equation is. Attrition is what you are predicting, and if the employee is younger and he is new joiner to the team and his length of service or his tenure with the manager is very less and he is new to the team. And this equation will be used to score each individual, and you will get a probability score for each of the employees at what level of risk he is at. And this is the matrix you can see. If one of the employees matching all these 4 attributes, then 99% of the time you can say that he is at high risk of leaving the organization. Once you know that these are the group of employees that are at high risk, it's always not required to take strategies on all the high risk of employees. You can profile them back and you can see how many are high potential, and it's required to retain them with you. And these are the next step and strategies that you can take based on your output. Maybe if he is a younger or millennial, you can do a follow-up analysis on better understanding them, and also you can provide a future focused feedback in order to make him understand what will be his career within the organization, and can you reconstruct his network group in order to make him or her more engaged. And think that manager, maybe try to understand, again do the manager follow-up work to understand manager effectiveness and who are good managers or potential manager, and also you can provide them soft skill trainings in order to handle their DAs better. And the third is, if he is new to the team, can we allocate buddy to him and also open communication to the team? Maybe we can provide him environment to open communication within the team. And we can't stop employees from leaving the organization if the organization don't have any plan to retain them. And employee retention through predictive modeling would require a lot of resource energy, but doing it is always worth, and this is proved through model. Thanks a lot.